This is my way of telling you happy birthday.
At my 35th birthday party, my husband raised his glass and said, "Happy birthday, Emily." For a moment, nothing felt wrong. Then he looked at me and said I wasn't the same anymore. That I used to be fun, used to be exciting, but now I was predictable. The room went quiet. No one laughed. Before anyone could react, he grabbed the cake and slammed it into my face. The entire room froze. Frosting covered my eyes and my mouth, pressing against my skin before slowly sliding down. I couldn't see clearly for a second, but I didn't move right away. I didn't rush to wipe it off or step back. I just stood there while the silence settled around me. And then he turned. He walked to Jessica, my best friend, and kissed her, right in front of everyone. There was no hesitation in it. No confusion about what it meant. It wasn't something you could explain away or pretend didn't happen. It was clear, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. The reaction spread through the room slowly. A few people whispered. Some looked away. Others stayed frozen, trying to process what they had just seen. No one stepped in. No one said anything. I lifted my hand and wiped my eyes, clearing the frosting slowly so I could see again. I didn't rush. I didn't react the way they expected me to. That was the only thing I controlled in that moment. The kiss ended, and neither of them looked concerned. Michael stepped back like nothing had happened. Jessica didn't look ashamed or uncomfortable. They both stood there as if the moment didn't require explanation. I watched them for a second longer, not because I didn't understand, but because I needed to be sure. The distance. The late nights. The silence. It wasn't random. It wasn't new. It had been happening. I didn't look at them again. Instead, I looked across the room and noticed the security camera mounted in the corner. It had been there the entire time, recording everything without interruption. Every word. Every action. Every second. That was what mattered. I wiped the rest of the frosting from my face and adjusted my posture. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. Anyone watching would have expected something else, something louder, something emotional. I didn't give them that. Around me, people started to move slightly, but no one came close. The space around me widened as if everyone had silently agreed to stay out of it. No one wanted to be involved. Michael remained where he was, completely unaffected. Jessica stood beside him, just as calm. Neither of them made any effort to speak to me or explain what had just happened. That told me everything I needed to know. They didn't see a problem. They didn't expect consequences. They believed the moment would pass. I took a slow breath and turned away. No words. No scene. No reaction. I walked. No one stopped me. No one called my name. Behind me, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds longer before low conversations started again. Not normal conversations. Careful ones. The kind people have when they don't want to say the wrong thing. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. By the time I stepped away from the crowd, the moment itself had already lost its importance. Not because it didn't matter, but because I had already understood it. It wasn't just humiliation. It was confirmation. Everything I had noticed but never pushed too far. Everything I had chosen to ignore because I didn't want to believe it. Now I didn't have a choice. I kept walking until the noise behind me faded completely. My pace didn't change. My expression didn't change. If anyone saw me, they would have thought I was fine. I wasn't fine. But I was clear. And clarity mattered more than anything else. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need answers. What I needed was already in front of me. Proof. Witnesses. A moment that couldn't be denied. That changed everything. Because once something like that happens publicly, it stops being just a personal issue. It becomes something else. Something that can't be hidden, twisted, or explained away later. And they had made sure of that. I stepped into a quieter part of the house and paused for the first time. Not to break down. Not to think about what I had lost. But to think about what came next. The camera had recorded everything. The guests had seen everything. Nothing could be denied. That was enough. I didn't need emotion to deal with this. I needed control. And I still had that. Inside the room, they probably thought the worst part was over. That whatever damage had been done would fade with time. That people would talk for a while and then move on. They were wrong. Because what they saw as a moment, I saw as the beginning. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already happened. That was the moment everything changed. The night ended, but the humiliation stayed with her. Emily didn't confront anyone, didn't ask questions, and didn't demand explanations. By the time the last guest left, she had already made a decision. Silence became her first move, not because she didn't feel anything, but because reacting too early would only give them time to adjust. The house returned to its quiet state, yet nothing felt the same. Everything remained exactly where she had arranged it, but the meaning behind it had changed. The laughter that once filled the space now felt distant, almost unreal, like something that no longer belonged to her. Michael offered no explanation, and Jessica didn't reach out, but Emily wasn't expecting either of them to. The truth was no longer something she needed from them. She found the truth on her own. It started with something small, a mistake. A second phone, not hidden well enough, not secured carefully enough. It wasn't meant to be discovered, but it was. Emily didn't rush when she picked it up. She didn't hesitate or overthink the moment. Instead, she unlocked it and began going through its contents with steady focus. Messages, call logs, photos, everything was there. Nothing erased, nothing cleaned up, nothing hidden beyond reach. As she moved through it, one thing became clear. This wasn't recent, and it wasn't accidental. Michael and Jessica hadn't crossed a line in a moment of weakness, they had built something behind her back over time. Emily read everything without interruption. Each conversation added another layer of clarity, removing any remaining doubt. They weren't just involved emotionally. They were working together, discussing her, planning around her, speaking as if she had already been removed from her own life. Then she saw what they had really done. It wasn't just the messages. It was the money. Large amounts, moved carefully, transferred quietly, designed to avoid attention. One transaction stood out immediately. A total of $140,000 had been transferred into a private account under Jessica's name. That single detail shifted the situation from betrayal to something far more serious. Emily didn't panic or confront them. She kept going, reading deeper, connecting details, understanding the full structure of what had been happening behind her back. It wasn't just an affair, it was a plan. They had been preparing to isolate her, limit her control, and move her assets without raising suspicion. That was the moment everything became clear. This wasn't driven by emotion or impulse. It was calculated, structured, and deliberate. And because of that, it required a response that was just as controlled. Emily placed the phone down carefully, her thoughts no longer scattered but focused. She understood exactly what she was dealing with, and more importantly, she understood that reacting too soon would only weaken her position. Confrontation would give them time to deny, adjust, and cover their tracks, and she wasn't going to allow that. So she became quieter, more observant, more precise. She started documenting everything. Every message was captured, every transaction recorded, every detail preserved. Screenshots were taken, timelines were built, and patterns were identified. Nothing was ignored, and nothing was rushed, because every piece of information needed to stand on its own without question. Her approach was careful and methodical. Each step was taken with intention, ensuring that nothing could be dismissed or explained away later. This wasn't about proving a point, it was about building something undeniable. When the time came, there would be no room for excuses, no space for denial, and no way to escape the truth. Days passed, but nothing about her behavior changed on the surface. She spoke when necessary, moved normally, and maintained the same presence she always had. To Michael, everything appeared stable. To Jessica, nothing seemed out of place. That sense of normalcy became their weakness. Because the more comfortable they felt, the more careless they became. And the more they revealed. Emily continued gathering everything she needed, and once she had enough, she made her next move. She hired a lawyer, someone experienced in handling financial fraud, someone who understood how to dismantle situations like this without alerting the people involved. The meetings were direct and efficient. Emily presented everything she had collected without exaggeration or emotion. Messages, transfers, timelines, each piece of evidence was laid out clearly. The lawyer understood immediately that this wasn't just personal betrayal. It crossed into illegal activity, and that shifted the balance of power entirely. From that point forward, everything became structured. Evidence was organized, accounts were traced, and connections were mapped out in detail. There was no confusion left, no missing pieces, and no uncertainty about what had been done. Emily didn't rush the process, because rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes create opportunities for escape. She wasn't going to give them that. Then her attention returned to the night everything started. The party, the humiliation, the moment that had been witnessed by dozens of people. That event wasn't just painful, it was useful. What had happened publicly could be exposed publicly, and that gave her an advantage. She arranged access to the security footage from that night. Every second had been captured, the speech, the insult, the moment the cake hit her face, and the kiss that followed. Nothing was missing, and nothing had been altered. She reviewed it carefully, not as someone reliving the moment, but as someone preparing to use it. Every reaction, every angle, every detail was noted. When the time came, it wouldn't just be shown, it would be understood. Emily didn't stop there. She returned to the messages and selected the ones that mattered most. Not everything needed to be revealed, only what proved intent. The conversations that showed planning, the statements that confirmed their actions, the details that connected everything together. She organized them step by step, ensuring that each piece would lead naturally to the next. There would be no confusion, no gaps, and no way to misinterpret what had happened. By the time she finished, everything was ready. The evidence was complete, the structure was clear, and the timing was set. Michael and Jessica had no idea what had been prepared. They continued their lives without suspicion, moving freely, speaking openly, completely unaware of what was coming. And that was their biggest mistake. Because while they believed they were ahead, they had already lost control of the situation. Emily didn't need to argue or create conflict. She didn't need to expose them immediately. She understood something they didn't. Timing. And when the moment arrived, everything they had done would come back to them at once. Not gradually, not in fragments, but all at once, leaving no space to recover. Emily didn't rush. She waited. Because she already knew how it would end. And this time, she would be the one in control. The room looked familiar, almost identical to the night everything began. The same type of gathering, the same kind of people, the same carefully controlled atmosphere filled with polite laughter and quiet conversations. On the surface, nothing had changed, but underneath, everything was different. Emily stood among the guests, calm and composed, her presence steady in a way that made her hard to read. No one could tell what she was thinking, and no one suspected what was about to happen. To them, this was just another social gathering, another normal evening. Michael moved through the room with his usual confidence, greeting people, shaking hands, carrying himself like a man who had nothing to worry about. As a mafia boss, he was used to control, and it showed in every step he took. Jessica stayed close to him, comfortable and relaxed, as if nothing had ever happened. To them, everything was normal. To Emily, this was the end. She had already arranged everything. Nothing in that room was accidental. Every detail had been carefully placed, every step planned in advance. The guests continued their conversations, unaware that the atmosphere they were enjoying was about to change completely. When Emily stepped forward, she didn't raise her voice or demand attention, yet something shifted immediately. Conversations slowed, heads turned, and focus moved toward her without effort. There was something in the way she carried herself that made people stop and watch. She looked around the room, her expression steady, her posture relaxed. Then she spoke, her voice calm and clear. "Thank you all for coming." A few guests nodded, unsure of where this was going. Michael glanced at her briefly, curious but not concerned, while Jessica simply watched. Emily continued without hesitation. "I wanted to share something with you all." There was no emotion in her tone, no sign of uncertainty. Just quiet confidence. Then the screens came on. At first, people didn't understand what they were seeing. Some turned their heads toward the display, expecting something harmless, maybe a collection of photos or a simple presentation. But within seconds, that assumption disappeared. The footage began to play. Clear and undeniable. Michael and Jessica appeared on the screen, together, in the exact moment from the birthday party. The speech played first, followed by the insult, the tension, and then the moment that no one could ignore, the cake hitting Emily's face. The room reacted immediately, but the footage didn't stop. It continued until it reached the kiss. This time, no one could look away. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Conversations ended mid-sentence, and the entire room focused on the screen. Some guests exchanged glances, others simply stared, trying to process what they were seeing. Emily didn't watch the footage. She watched the room instead. Michael's expression changed slightly, just enough to reveal that he understood what was happening. Jessica's posture stiffened, her confidence beginning to slip. The video ended, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than anything before it. Emily took a step forward, her voice breaking through the stillness. "I think that explains enough." Her tone remained calm, steady, completely in control. "Before anyone could respond," she continued. "But that's not the only thing." That single sentence shifted the tension even further. What had already been shocking suddenly felt incomplete, like something bigger was coming. Emily reached for her phone and began to read. Her voice was clear, each word deliberate, each sentence chosen carefully. The messages she read were private conversations between Michael and Jessica, discussions that revealed far more than an affair. They spoke about plans, decisions, and actions that showed intent. As she read, the room absorbed every word. The reactions deepened, shifting from shock to realization. This wasn't just betrayal, it was something calculated. Emily didn't rush. She selected only what mattered, each message building on the last, removing any possibility of denial. There was no confusion left in the room. The truth was clear. Michael remained silent, but his composure had changed. It was subtle, but visible. Jessica's expression tightened as she realized there was no way out of this moment. Emily lowered her phone, allowing a brief pause to settle over the room before continuing. "And for anyone who thinks this is just personal," she said, her voice still even, "it isn't." That statement shifted everything again. She turned slightly, directing her attention toward Michael's business partner, who stood among the guests, watching closely. Until that moment, he had only been an observer. Now, he was directly involved. "There were financial transactions," Emily said. "Large amounts moved without authorization." The impact was immediate. The situation was no longer just about a relationship. It had crossed into something more serious, something that carried real consequences. She didn't need to explain further. The message was clear. Michael's partner stepped forward slightly, his expression changing as the weight of the situation became clear to him. Michael didn't interrupt, didn't attempt to deny anything. There was nothing he could say that would undo what had already been revealed. Emily let the silence settle. She didn't argue or raise her voice. Everything had already been said. After a brief moment, she took a breath and spoke again, her tone unchanged. "That's everything." There was no anger in her voice, no need for it. The finality of her words was enough. She stepped back, turned, and began to walk away. There was no hesitation in her movement. She didn't look at Michael, didn't acknowledge Jessica, didn't react to the people in the room. There was nothing left for her there. Behind her, the room remained frozen as people processed what had just happened. Some whispered quietly, others stood in silence, trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. Michael stood still, no longer in control of the situation he once dominated. Jessica remained where she was, her earlier confidence gone, replaced with uncertainty. The damage was complete. Emily reached the door and stepped outside without slowing down. The air felt different, quieter, as if the tension she had just left behind no longer followed her. For the first time since that night, everything felt clear. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because the outcome had already been decided. Behind her, everything they had tried to hide was unraveling all at once. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. Emily didn't need to see what happened next. She already knew. Everything fell apart faster than he expected. What was exposed didn't stay hidden. The truth moved quickly through every connection Michael had built over the years. Conversations that once worked in his favor began turning against him, and the control he was known for started slipping in ways he couldn't stop. By the next day, the consequences had already begun. Michael didn't lose everything at once, but he was already losing control. His business partner didn't ignore what had been revealed. The financial irregularities raised immediate concern, and once attention was drawn to them, more details started coming to light. Accounts were reviewed, transactions were questioned, and decisions were made without him. Access was restricted first, then removed completely. Positions that once depended on him were reassigned, and the authority he carried disappeared faster than he expected. His reputation followed the same path. The same people who once respected him began distancing themselves, not out of loyalty, but out of caution. No one wanted to be tied to what he had become. Jessica's situation didn't unfold the same way, but it was just as damaging. At first, she believed she could recover, that things would settle and people would move on. But that didn't happen. The truth had been revealed too clearly, and the way it came out left no room for misunderstanding. What she had been part of wasn't just betrayal. It was something bigger. The apartment she had secured became a burden instead of an escape. Payments that once seemed manageable quickly turned into pressure, especially without the support she thought she would have. The stability she believed in disappeared, leaving her to deal with everything alone. Socially, things shifted just as quickly. Messages stopped coming in. Invitations disappeared. Conversations became distant or avoided entirely. The same people who once welcomed her now kept their distance. No one confronted her. They simply cut her off. And that silence left her completely isolated. Emily didn't watch any of it happen. She didn't need to. By the time everything began to collapse, she had already moved forward. Filing for divorce wasn't emotional. It was planned, structured, and backed by everything she had already gathered. The process moved quickly because there was no confusion left to resolve. The evidence she had collected didn't just support her case, it defined it. Every detail mattered. Every record. Every transaction. Every message. Nothing could be denied. Nothing could be explained away. The outcome became clear early on. Emily didn't fight for control. She proved she already had it. The house, the investment accounts, and her consultancy all remained with her. What had once been shared was no longer divided. It was reassigned based on what had been revealed, and everything she built stayed exactly where it belonged. With her. Michael didn't fight the way he normally would have. At that point, he couldn't. Too much had already been exposed, and too much had already been lost. Jessica had no place in the outcome. No claim. No position. Nothing. For Emily, the end of the legal process didn't feel dramatic. There was no celebration, no emotional release, no need for closure in the way people expect. Because closure had already happened the moment she took control. Everything that needed to be done had been done. Everything that needed to be proven had been proven. What came next was quieter, but far more powerful. Her life didn't change overnight in appearance, but in structure, everything was different. The space she lived in felt lighter, no longer tied to something working against her. The work she built continued, now fully under her direction, without interference or hidden pressure. Time moved forward, and with it came a different kind of stability. Not the kind that depends on other people, but the kind that comes from control. Emily didn't look back at what happened with regret. She understood it clearly. It was the moment everything hidden was revealed, and more importantly, the moment she chose not to hesitate. Michael's name faded from her life. Jessica became irrelevant. Not because what they did was small, but because it no longer had any impact on where she was going. They had been part of a chapter. Nothing more. As time passed, the outcome became more visible. Her work grew stronger, her decisions became sharper, and her position became more stable. Everything she had built before remained, but now it was protected by experience. People saw the difference. Not just success. Control. And that changed everything. Emily didn't need to explain anything. She didn't need to justify her actions. The results spoke for themselves. What started as public humiliation ended in complete reversal. Not through anger, not through chaos, but through precision. And that was what made it powerful. In the end, she didn't just survive what they did to her. She took everything back. And this time, no one could take it from her again.